So yesterday we read about the story of Yisro, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And basically there were, in the Parsha, it's the shortest Parsha we've had yet. You know, I think it's the 18th Parsha or something like that we've had since the beginning, since Genesis. And it's kind of basically two narratives. You have a story of Jethro arriving to visit the camp, and you have obviously the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are recounted in two places in the Torah, in Exodus chapter 20, and once again in Deuteronomy. I don't remember exactly which chapter, but maybe chapter 10 or something like that, chapter 6. I don't remember exactly. Either way, that's what we have in the Parsha. So what happens? Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. He's a minister in a place called Midian. He hears about all the wonderful, miraculous things that happen to the Jewish people. They have the 10 plagues, the Exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the sea. He gets all galvanized and excited, and he says, I'm coming to join the people. He takes his daughter, Moses' his wife, Zipporah, who was I'm sorry? Yeah, what does that mean? It's a good question.
Is it a tribe?
Well, it's not clear what it means, because Rashi gives us, typically it means that she's a person of color.
Oh.
But Rashi says that she was not a person of color, rather, just as it's inescapable that a person of color is a person of color, so too is inescapable that she had sterling character. That's what it says. So kind of metaphoric. Just like we say, as the day means when something is so clear, it's like we know now it's day outside. You know, there's some things that are inescapably true, undeniable, incontrovertible. There's no room for debate, you know. So that's what it says about her. So what it means, maybe she, is literally, or that interpretation, whatever. She's a Cushite, right? What does that mean? It's up for discussion. So Jethro takes Moses' two sons and his wife, and they make the trek to join people. And they join the people, and they make a big party. Moses' father-in-law is here. Everyone gets down. They break bread. And the following day, Jethro introduces kind of a system of organizing and outsourcing all the tasks of Moses. Because he's like, he wakes up in the morning, he sees Moses is sitting, and there's a line stretched out 100,000 people deep. People ask him questions. The walk-in asks him a question, he answers. The next one asks him questions, he answers. And he's sitting there from morning to night. And everyone's standing, waiting in line for Moses. He says, this is inefficient. Right? Why don't we outsource some of your duties, delegate it to people that are capable? So what they do is they break up the people into groups of 10, groups of 50, groups of 100, and groups of thousands. Every group of 10 has one guy who's a little bit more knowledgeable, and thus a simple question, you just ask your group leader, and that's it. And if it's more advanced, he can answer that. Well, then every group of 50, every 5 groups of 10 has a leader of that group who's a little bit more advanced, and etc. to 100 and 1,000. If a question, the leader of 1,000 had 600 leaders of 1,000 couldn't answer, that gets to Moses. Moses is able to have some sort of semblance of organized life or whatever. It doesn't make sense to have the greatest scholar to answer the most simple question, obviously. Only the more advanced questions get to Moses. That's the base of the first half of the Parsha. And then the second half of the Parsha, we have the most momentous event in human history, certainly the most significant event in the Torah, and that is the Mount Sinai experience. And God tells Moses, tell the people to separate themselves and cleanse themselves for 3 days. In 3 days, they're going to have this tremendous, transcendent event. And they get ready, and they don't touch the mountain, and all the precautions that were given. And Moses goes up to the mountain, and everyone experienced national prophecy and the details, exactly what they saw. And we hear the vision of the Jewish people. You shall be for me a mamlechas Torah, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is the Jewish people in the fullest extent of their glory. God promises Moses, now you will be believed forever. Thus, we find the distinct character, distinct nature of Moses' prophecy is discovered over here. Moses is a verified prophet because his prophecy was experienced in tandem with the entire Jewish people. Thus, if Abraham comes over to us and tells us, hey, I'm a prophet, we say to him, how do we know you're not lying? There's always the element of doubt. Just like if Joseph Smith or Muhammad or anyone else comes and tells us they're a prophet. But Moses, his prophecy and his classification as a prophet was experienced on a national scale. Everyone was there. Everyone was temporarily elevated to a level of prophecy. They hear God's voice. They see these unnatural just visions, and they see sounds and they hear colors. It seems very very supernatural. And they hear Moses come up to the mountain. It says that they say we're about to die. It stops speaking to us. Anyhow, that's what happens. Thus, when Moses tells us that Abraham is a prophet, we believe him. Moses is called the father of all prophets. Why? Because his classification of Abraham as a prophet is what causes us to believe Abraham is a prophet. Not Abraham himself, because Abraham himself, he experienced his prophecy in private. Thus, we don't know, maybe he's a charlatan, maybe he's pulling the wool over our eyes, maybe he's lying, maybe he's just mistaken. We don't know for sure. He's a good guy. Abraham is a pretty remarkable fellow. Right? But his word alone is not enough to sway a nation, or even a skeptical, healthy skeptic. But Moses, we believe for him forever. Why do we believe him forever? Because collectively, as a nation, hundreds of thousands of people experienced prophecy. We heard Moshe come to the mountain. We know Moses is a verified prophet. If he was on Twitter, he'd have that little blue check. By the way, when a future prophet, any future prophet who comes and contradicts the words of Moses, we spoke a little bit about this when we spoke about why Jews don't believe in JC. We said that because the validity and the veracity and the believability of any prophet is confined to the parameters that Moses set. Why? Because our only reason to indeed believe a prophet is because of Moses. Thus, if a prophet comes to contradict the words of Moses, by definition, we're not going to believe him. The only reason why we would believe him is because Moses told us to believe him. Right? And Moses, as the father of all prophets and a verified prophet, his prophecy is going to overrule any other prophecy. Thus, in the 16th century, we had probably the most traumatic, or the event that had the longest, the negative event, calamitous event that had the longest aftershocks affecting the Jewish people since probably the destruction of the temple, was the false messiahhood of Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, exactly. As a false prophet, and in Jewish history, we know we've had a few of those. False prophet, false messiah. But the impact that he had, the negative impact that he had on the Jewish people, was far greater than, let's say, even JC. Because JC was, from the very beginning, the Judeo-Christian movement, as we spoke about, broke away and became a distinct Gentile religion, which we've had our ups and downs with them over the years, but internally it wasn't as traumatic or as chaotic or as deleterious to us as a nation. Shabtai Tzvi comes along, and before you know it, a third, up to half of the people are making plans to move to Israel. Right? We're selling our houses, selling our business, we're moving to Israel. This is it. The temple's going to be rebuilt, and we're going to go back to Israel. And people really invested a lot into this belief. Comes along Shabtai Tzvi, he ends up in Israel. I don't know, he ends up in Turkey, I think, in Istanbul or Constantinople, as it was called then. And the Sultan tells him, if you don't give up your shenanigans, we're going to execute you. So he says, okay, fine, I'll become a Muslim. So he became a Muslim. Can you imagine? How traumatic was that for the Jewish people when suddenly the individual who was going to be the Messiah and take the Jews out of this darkest period, he's converting to Islam. Okay.
When did this happen?
This happened in the 17th century, 1600s. The exact dates. There's a whole story. Maybe if we ever progress in our discussion of Jewish history past the first century, we'll talk about it. But the effects of that are still felt today, because we are so wary of anyone who dips their toes into the whole messianic, just the word messianic is like, when you hear the word Messiah as a Jew, it sounds like fingernails and chalkboard. That's what it sounds like. That's what it should sound like. Because we have such collective national trauma from that particular event and how it tore apart the Jewish people. And we have centuries later, we have these titanic debates as to, was someone a closeted Sabbatean, they call them. The people that even after he converts to Islam, and then he still has his, the people that endorsed him and his supporters, they're still saying, oh no, this is all part of the thing and it's a test and whatever. So, which is, by the way, a problem. If someone is so heavily, quote unquote, married to an idea or to a movement, and it's ultimately proven false, it's very, very hard to abandon that, because essentially what you're doing is you're admitting that your life and what you espoused and what you believed in and what you supported and what you sweated over was a farce. So that's a bit dangerous. So what happened? So they pivoted. Well, he's Muslim, whatever, but it's still part of the plan. And he had his promoter, kind of like he was his Don King, a fellow by the name of Nathan of Gaza, who was the real. He was the real power or the force behind the movement. Anyhow, so I don't remember how we got there.
What did they say, that he was going to all of a sudden unconvert from Islam and become a Jew again and lead everybody to? I mean, what did these apologists?
Oh well, yes, I'm saying those were just the diehards. Okay. They concocted something. Okay. But even hundreds of years later, there were people of great character and scholarship that were accused of being closeted Sabbateans, like the famous controversy. I don't want to get into this too much, but the Emden and Eibeshitz controversy. Google it. It's a crazy story. Insane. Basically, think of it as like one of the greatest rabbis of the 18th century. Two greatest rabbis happen to live in the same town, which is remarkable, same small little town. And then one of them says, oh, by the way, this other rabbi, he's a Sabbatean. He really believes in Shabtai Tzvi.
What's a Sabbatean?
Which was the people, those are the people that follow Shabtai Tzvi. And that tore apart the Jewish people. Tore apart. And he had a print. Rabbi Emden, his name was Jacob Emden. He was a great scholar. Everyone agrees about that. But he was also a little bit quirky, shall we say. Like, we're talking about in the 1750s, he had a printing press in his basement. And he would print all these stuff. And he spent his life basically proving that his neighbor, who was a scholar of incredible renown, like a scholar we have today, we have extant 120 publications, scholarly publications. Some of them are just so fundamental to any scholarship that we have anywhere. Every bookshelf that has the essential books on Jewish scholarship will have a whole bunch of it from him. And he says, oh, by the way, he's a Sabbatean, and proofs, and anyhow, the story's insane. But either way, back to Moses as we started. When Moses tells us the law is X, Y, or Z, no future prophet can change that. Shabtai Tzvi, the people that called him out as a fraud before everyone knew he was a fraud, they pointed to things that he did against Moses, that Moses wouldn't have approved of. And he says, well, listen, the Messiah is coming, things are different. He engaged in illicit sexual activities. He would do things, he would say things that you were not supposed to say under Jewish law. And he was saying, and he justified it under the premise, well, Messiah is coming, and thus we could change everything a little bit. A little bit tweaking here, a little bit tweaking there. And a lot of the people realized this is not the way it's supposed to be, because this is coming in conflict with Moses, And even minor things like Jewish customs that he made light of or he didn't practice was enough for some of the more intuitive analysts of his candidacy to determine that he was a fraud. Like, for example, he would sit like this he would sit. And the halacha says that a scholar rabbi doesn't sit all slouched over. Okay, something.
Except on Passover.
Well, so thank you. Yeah. Anyhow, so that's Shabtai Tzvi, that's Moses. Our association, relationship with Moses is different than any other prophet. The father of prophets, we only believe in future prophets because we believe in Moses. The Ten Commandments, obviously. Ten Commandments is the bedrock, the foundation of, obviously our religion, but we could say the morality in the world. It's, even atheists believe in the Ten Commandments. The impact of the Ten Commandments. This is how we look at a moral, a just society. That's in this week's parsha. We look at the Ten Commandments as a microcosm of the entire Torah at large. Thus, these 10, if you extrapolate them, it contains within all of them the elements of the entire Torah. So,
like the Noahide law.
Well, Noahide laws is a little bit different because it's seven fundamental laws, but and they're a functioning society has to have those 7 laws. This is a step up. This is the Torah, not just to have. We don't settle for just functioning society. We'll call mediocrity or a baseline for civilization, which is the seven Noahide laws. You cannot have a functioning society without the 7 Noahide laws. We're saying here is this a step up. As Jews, we are demanded of a lot more than just to have a functioning society. What's expected of us is the responsibility of carrying the burden of mankind on our shoulders.
But aren't the 10 Commandments also referred to as the 10 minimums, the 10 suggestions?
The 10 suggestions.
The baseline for which civilization.
They're called the 10
Right.
words.
Yeah, well,
10 statements.
They're called the 10 words.
the 10 words. Well,
Yeah.
as I said, Dibra, they're called 10 words or 10 statements.
Yeah.
I would agree, but I think there's an element of morality that's above just the baseline of civilization. There is overlap. We would agree. There is overlap as well.
Which distinguishes Jews from the rest of the world, right?
That's what we would say. Yes. But I do think today as a society at large, not just the Jewish people, we would say that the 10 Commandments, more or less, are what we accept as societies. Means I think society has kind of upgraded from 7 Noahide laws to the 10 Commandments, more or less. Now, but if you actually look at the 10 Commandments, what's the first one? The first one is believe in God. What's the last one? Booyah, thou shalt not covet, not what your friend has, not his house, not his car, not his wife, nothing that he has. And we always look at the beginning and the end as being kind of a one launch string, one link between just the idea of faith. Believe in God. Have that basic moral fiber. That extends, thou shalt not covet. Remember, when it says thou shalt not covet, it doesn't mean thou shalt not act upon your desires of coveting your friend's wife, his car, his house, etc.
You say it does not mean, it means you
No, it means you shouldn't covet. Don't even
shouldn't
want
even
it.
think about it.
Now, that's obviously a much greater demand. It means not only don't you, try to usurp your friend and getting his house or his car or whatever, don't even want it.
Right.
That is a manifestation of faith on such a deep level where I believe that the Almighty has a plan for me. Whatever I have is whatever I need. Whatever I have is whatever I deserve. Whatever I have is what's right for me. Whatever my friend has is right for him and what he deserves. And I don't even desire what he has because I believe that God has a plan and God allocated to everyone what they need, what they deserve, and that's what they have. So that is, if you take a look at the beginning and the end, it's like it's the full spectrum of what the demands of faith that the Torah is expecting of us. Not only believe in God to such an extent where that the commandment of thou shalt not covet makes sense, it's fair, it's reasonable, because at the highest levels of faith, even the feelings of desires force what is not mine dissipate.
But if you have that, what you have is basically a medieval static society. If I don't want my neighbor's car, let's say, not his car particularly, but a car like my neighbor's car, then I'm not going to go out, get a great education,
Yeah, I think that there's a distinction. I think there's both could still be true. Of course, we demand the most of ourselves, and as Jews, we know that's one of the characteristics of Jews worldwide is that they don't settle, that they're always trying to shoot for the top in whatever field that may be, as we know very well. And I still think that could be true. That me wanting a better life and me wanting to improve my lot does not necessarily mean that I covet what my fellow has. Like I said, I want a nice car. I don't want his car. I want a nice car. I think that, I don't covet his stuff and look at his stuff and peek through my blinds and like, look, yeah, I want, or better. Better. Why? Right? That is the Jewish attitude. We are saying that we, as God chose a nation, however we're going to understand it, we get the fine details of what that means. But what it for sure means is that we don't settle for mediocrity. We shoot for the top of whatever area and arena of whatever measure of success you're going to use. We want to make sure that we're in the top.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the implication is that if you specifically target your own neighbor's stuff, then it could lead to stealing from, or as opposed to doing it on your own, building.
But
your
remember,
own
one of the other of the 10 Commandments is don't steal. Thus, independent of the prohibition against stealing, is on a much higher level, don't covet. Doesn't mean you should be happy and just sit around and just let life pass you by. Of course not. But I think there's room for a difference between coveting what your fellow has and wanting your better life, maybe in a way like your neighbor or the community or whatever.
Well, then I'm sorry. I think ideally, like if you're getting it, like in the whole sense, it's not ever going to be about stuff. Like you're going to pursue the most that you can, and you're going to do the best that you can in service to God. Like you're going to want to make the most of the abilities and opportunities that God has given you to honor God. And then you're also going to want to use the best of your abilities to build and improve your community and take care of other people in honor of God. And then stuff will come with that because that's how society works, Yeah. It's not that you go to school and get a good job. Well, some people do go to school and get a good job so they can have good stuff. But ideally, you're going to do this because you want to be the best that you can and improve the world around you. And society will have a tendency, God, through society, will have a tendency to reward that, I think. And then you'll get stuff. I mean, there are people who really serve God, do the best they can, and live in poverty. But there are also people who don't. So, I don't know.
Well, and I mean, I would hate to think that the intent of God is nobody should try and create
Who
wealth
said that? I never said that.
No, and I know you didn't.
No.
But I mean, some people might try and
but
say
that's
that.
the backside of her argument.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like Bill Gates, no one has more than him. But I don't think anybody's given. Now, I don't know if he does it for religious reasons, but he has helped more of the less fortunate than virtually anyone else. And he couldn't do that if he didn't create the wealth on his own that he did.
Why does our study have to have why do we have to look at, I know we're talking about wealth creation so negatively? It's a very positive thing.
Absolutely.
What's wrong with that?
Have,
that's why our country.
Well, part of it is we have an administration that sends that message.
We're back.
I don't mean to get into that.
Well,
But I'm trying to answer. That's sincerely what I believe the answer to your question.
No, I'm saying like
one of the problems today of corporate America is in the beginning, if you provide a service for someone, and if that's the thought of it, you provide a service for someone and you're not creating wealth, you're creating a service for someone. Whether the wealth comes or not doesn't make any difference. But corporate America is, when it turned to bean counters, I'll use Motorola for an example. When Paul Galvin started Motorola, he started in a garage, and he said there's got to be a way to provide communications from the police car, back to the police headquarters. And so he provided a service. He basically invented the police radio. And as long as he provided that service, then it began to build. He wasn't building wealth. That wasn't his purpose. But the moment that corporate America turns around and say, how can we make money? That's where the problem comes. The idea of fulfilling a service to people is gone, and the idea is now to make money.
Well, but I'm not sure, Dick, you who I consider from what I understand, a fairly conservative capitalistic guy. I mean, you almost were making an argument against it right there. Because certainly there's more than just police radios.
Well, yes,
if Motorola wanted to make money and they feel
I think
they
what
could,
he's saying is that if the business strategy is just about monetization, it's not going to make a lot of
service
money.
to God. It's not the money came. This is the Bill Gates story. I don't think he started out to build wealth. He started out to provide the intellect to build something that would help people. And wealth came as a result of that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, but it couldn't have gotten to the extent. There had to be something motivating him. I mean, I think wealth or money, as you put it, is a reflection. If you have a lot of it, unless you steal it from someone, which nobody here supports, if you have a lot of it, it's a reflection of what you have provided for the greater good. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anybody showing you. The wealth wouldn't come because nobody'd be interested in what you have. If there's no value.
Yeah, but he provided jobs for people. He provided service for them, etc.
And I think that's great.
Yeah.
How's this all going to trigger the patients?
I don't know.
But that's
Either way.
I was like, do I get the email?
Okay, so
but
back to Yisro. So that's the parsha basically. That's the two stories: the arrival of Yisro, his wonderful suggestion, and the momentous experience at Mount Sinai. So now there's actually a debate. We know the Torah is not written necessarily in chronological order. Right? This is a big mistake that many of the higher Bible criticism experts miss in their Bible 101 class. Is that, as evident many, many, many times, very clearly, the Torah is not necessarily in chronological order. Thus, we find a disagreement as to whether or not this particular parsha and the two major events that happened, if they happened in the order in which they're presented. There are those that say that Jethro arrived between the Exodus and 50 days later, the Mount Sinai experience. We know the Exodus happened on the 15th day of Nisan. 7 days later, they had it was the splitting of the sea. And then another 43 days later is the Mount Sinai experience. There are those that suggest or want to argue, present the position that Yisro arrived in between that. He came from Midian. Came from Midian. There are those that say he came afterwards. Now, according to those that say that Jethro actually came afterwards, we have to ask ourselves a very basic fundamental question, and that is, why would the Torah go out of its way to present the order of the events in a way where it's out of chronological order? That, first it should have said the story of Mount Sinai, and then tells the story of Jethro, if it's so relevant. So, perhaps the perspective is as follows, and this is how it's going to segue to patience. There's something remarkable about the story of Jethro, so remarkable, and it's so essential, pivotal, crucial to the Torah story that it has to be told beforehand. It may have happened afterwards. I don't know, 4 months afterwards, 4 years afterwards. Who knows when it happened afterwards? Let's assume it happened afterwards. Despite the fact that it happened afterwards, when we're going to teach the lesson of Jethro, we're going to tell it before the Torah because it is a prelude. It's a precursor. It's a necessary preamble for the Torah as an introduction. If you want to maximize the impact of the Torah and the Torah experience that was given at Mount Sinai, you have to incorporate within yourselves the lessons of Jethro. Now, Jethro, what happened? What's the first words of the parsha? Vayishma Yisro. And Jethro heard everything that happened to Jewish people. They left Egypt, the 10 plagues, splitting the sea, etc. That's what happened. He heard it. All the way in Midian, the news spread of this wonderful, transcendental redemption, exodus from Egypt. Everyone heard this. Yisro heard it as well. Now, we find only one account of someone acting upon that information. We only find one story of one individual, right? Yisro, Jethro, of saying, you know what? I'm going to change my life. I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to leave my position. I'm going to leave everything, my community, and come join the people. The impact of the information changed him. It was an impetus for him to decide to make a change in his life. And I think this is, when we talk about Mussar, this is it. The most important characteristic of the Torah, of the morality of Mussar that we talk about, is the ability to apply what you hear to yourself. We talked about this a few times. It's a common thread in our classes here, that there's this gulf between what you know and what you do, your head and your heart. Perhaps everyone found out about what happened to Jewish people on Mount Sinai and leaving Egypt. Perhaps everyone knew about it. Yisro heard about it. His neighbor probably heard about it. You maybe made the news. You read it online, or you read the paper and you saw, whoa, what a wonderful story. The Jewish people had this exodus. Okay, let's move on to the weekend review, or let's see what movies are, or the book review, or the sports section. Yisro is the embodiment of someone who says, this story is going to change me. I'm going to apply the story to myself. I'm going to do something different as a result of what I now know. He had the quality of self-critique and self-application. Perhaps the Torah changed the order of the narrative from the chronological to out of order, to tell you that if you want to actually maximize these 10 commandments that we're going to tell you as the baseline for whatever else is going to happen in the Torah, you want to maximize it, you want to have the full impact, you got to follow the model of Yisro, of Jethro. You have to learn the quality of self-application. You have to take the information and internalize it to yourself. When something else happens, right? What does it mean for me? How do I change my life now? How does this impact me? How do I act differently? There's a great statement in the Talmud. So the Talmud, once again, it's somewhat of an chronological question. We know the Talmud, or the Mishnah, is comprised of 63 different books, and it's broken down to sections. We spoke about this briefly. You have a section called Nashim, which means women, all women-related issues, so marriage, divorce, marital contracts, etc. Everything that happens in matrimony. And thrown in there, you have the book of Nazir. Nazir is an individual who decides to accept upon himself a oath of Nazirus, wherein for a minimum of 30 days they cannot drink wine, nor can they come in contact with dead people, or even eat grapes or any grape derivatives. And the content of the book of Nazir really has no place in the section of matrimony. It belongs in the section of the sacrifices. Why? Because the vast majority of the content of the book deals with the process and the procedures that the Nazir goes through. Because after someone accepts the Nazir, how do they have to live as a Nazir? And now what happens if they want to snap out of it? They have to go to the temple and bring sacrifices and shave their head, etc. So it doesn't belong at all in the book of, or in the section of matrimony. And if you look at the structure, at the order of the books of the Talmud, you have the book of Levirate marriages, Yevamos, the book of Ksubos, which is marriage documents. You have Nidarim, which is vows. Okay, you have Nazir, which is the book of Nazir, and you have Sota, the book of adultery. What happens when you have adultery or alleged adultery? So the Talmud asks the question, the very first page of the Talmud, it says, why was the book of Nazir placed adjacent to the book of Sota, which talks about adultery? Why were these things? Why is the book of Nazir out of place? And it says to teach you a lesson. Haroeh Sota bilkul kula yazir atzmo min hayayin. If someone sees a incident of adultery, or if someone sees the ramifications of adultery, they have to make on themselves a vow of a Nazir. A Nazir is someone who wants to live an esoteric life, or at least for a minimum of 30 days. A life, an ascetic life. Ascetic is the right word. Scratch that, please, from the court. Esoteric is the wrong word. Ascetic. That's what a Nazir is. It's someone who wants to live for at least a minimum of 30 days on a higher level of kind of sanctity or holiness. just not involved in the base pleasures or the base way. The minimum of 30 days. Yeah, well, sort of. If you see an incident of adultery or the ramifications of adultery, you have to say, I am going to become a Nazir. Right? If you happen to see your friend or your neighbor or your cousin going through a messy divorce, why? Someone was unfaithful. Says the Talmud, you have to say, this could happen to me. This could happen to me. Therefore, I am going to take some time to live a life that has no overlap with the frivolity that brings about adultery. Thus, I'm going to spend a minimum of 30 days not drinking wine. Why? Because drinking wine could potentially bring to that kind of mistake that we will regret forever.
Then I'd be living that kind of a life every damn day, because the more people you know, who does not know somebody that is...
Okay, so maybe every day we have...
adultery?
Okay, maybe every day we have to take that lesson. But let's try to zoom out of the small picture. The big picture is, what it's telling us is that the attitude that we have to have is when we see someone else do something wrong, we have to guard, we have to take a step in ensuring that we don't make that same mistake.
Kind of building a fence around our own activities.
But also it's internalizing the lessons that we encounter, right? Applying what we see in others to ourselves. I think that is the lesson of Yisro. And that is probably the most important lesson of all of Musar. And that is where, I can't tell you how many times I was studying with one of my students on Tuesday night. And I remember how we were studying some Talmud in Sanhedrin. And he tells me, I can already tell, I could tell where he's going because I've heard this so many times before. He's like, what do you do with someone who did something wrong and refuses to recognize it? And I'm like, and I know that he's not recently, 2 years ago, divorced. I say, you're probably talking about your ex-wife, I assume. He's like, yes. I knew that because I've heard it so many times before where people say, someone did something so wrong to me, how do I get myself to forgive them? I've never heard someone say, I did something so wrong to someone else, how do I get forgiveness? Because we have a tendency to take the misdeeds of others, and that is a deal. But us, it's very hard to self-critique. It's very hard to self-critique. And I'm not trying to say that he's any worse than I am. I think I'm guilty as charged. I think we're all guilty as charged, because that's the human condition. Musar is trying to change that. Musar is trying to tell us, when you see the misdeeds of others, someone you're not even related to, you happen to chance upon a story of adultery. You happen to be there where the proceedings and the process of what we do in a case of adultery are ongoing. You automatically have to apply it to yourself. It has nothing to do with you, right? Nothing. It could happen to me. And in any time you see any incident of negative character, of bad behavior, typically what we would do is, I can't believe that this guy, had a society. Like, who are your parents? That's the kind of question we ask, Who raised you? That's what we typically do. The Torah tells us, and the Musar attitude is to say, okay, this could happen to me. How do I make sure that I'm above that?
Does the Torah suggest that you can get past adultery? Because I know we spoke about adultery as being almost a deal breaker.
Yeah, well, the Torah says that should someone commit adultery, well, remember, adultery is one of the things that under a Jewish court is capital punishment.
Although I don't know that was actually meted out.
Well, capital punishment was almost never meted out. As we know,
two witnesses.
You have to have two witnesses. You have to have forewarning within 5 seconds of the event. We have to have someone accept upon themselves and say, I'm doing it despite the fact that I know that I'll get executed. We have to have the cross-examination, the interrogation. The investigation is so rigorous where we isolate the witnesses, we intimidate them, we threaten them.
Of course, I always love that we blame the man more than the female.
No, but they're equally liable. So yes, it does have a degree of finality. In fact, what the Talmud does say, just talking about a verse in Scripture that says, "Mu'uvas la yuchal l'sakim." When someone is so perverted, it's impossible to fix. It talks about there are some times where something is beyond repair, and it does mention adultery in an instance where that bears a bastard, as we say. However, it seems like, or when someone commits murder, gives a few examples of things that are so irreversible that there's no way to remove that kind of that misdeed. It has a lasting effect. But we say everything. People do a lot of heinous things, and the Torah provides an avenue. The Almighty provides an avenue for tshuva, for repentance.
And Jewish law provides an avenue for adultery, from adultery.
In what sense?
Get over it. You come to terms with it.
Can you, if the one that was the victim of adultery, so to speak, forgives you, and then you atone, because it's a sin against both God and against the person.
That's right. That's right. So
you have to atone with God and with the person, right?
Well, what the verse says is that when someone commits adultery, they may, under certain circumstances, be prohibited from staying married to their wives or to the husbands. Or they may, and for sure, they're not allowed. Should they get divorced, they're not allowed to marry the person that they committed the act with.
So in theory,
so someone can't say, you know what, I committed adultery, I feel bad, take half my money, and I'm going to marry this girl. Can't do that.
So then that would discount almost the capital punishment, because obviously, if you're
capital punishment almost never happens in Jewish law. In actuality, but it does underscore the severity that Torah does place on that kind of behavior. Either way, Musar at large, I think that's a very important lesson for us. When we talk about Musar, what we mean is the ability to self-analyze, self-assess, self-critique, and this is not an easy thing, because the second you are told by someone, by the way, you should know that you have X negative character, instantaneously you're going to try to justify yourself. How do you behave? I had this week. Someone sent me an email, a very biting email. And my first instinct was, why didn't you make a certain phone call? Whatever. So my first instinct, I tried to call him 3 times and he played phone tag. That was my first response, to try to justify myself. But then I said, no, he's right. And I'm wrong. And that's painful. But the correct response is to admit that I'm wrong. And eventually, after I got that email, the next day, I sat down and finally made the phone call and spoke for the half hour for the person I need to speak to. But my initial knee-jerk response was trying to justify it. Why did I do that? Because this email exposed negative character. To have your negative character exposed is painful. Thus, to avoid pain, humans, like babies, try to avoid that at any cost. It's one of the basic characteristics of humanity is that we avoid pain. Children
Brian
do that.
Williams is a good example of that.
Who?
Brian Williams.
Yeah, he's only gone a couple days. This too shall
Well,
pass.
we'll see. You don't know. I mean, that could be longer.
2 weeks.
That's predictor of future
Well,
behavior.
but but if this investigation shows more that he did than even we know now, then it might be longer than 2 weeks.
Who knows?
But adultery is with a married woman. That's the definition of it, isn't it? If
Well, it
you
could be a married man.
committing adultery is with another married woman.
Yeah, so by Torah law,
By Torah law.
it
Doesn't say anything about fornication. It talks about adultery.
Oh,
with a
well-
We know
married woman.
Obviously, people slept with each other who weren't married in the Bible. So.
yeah, and remember,
yeah.
that's not
that's-
that's
That's
not
not adultery.
that's not adultery. Of course not. That's not adultery.
No.
That's just
Maybe Pat Robertson would say it's not right. But,
Yeah.
it's,
Wait a minute, back up a second. Say again what your definition of adultery was. I thought
intercourse out of marriage is not adultery.
it was correct.
Assuming no one's married.
Correct.
It's-
But
If
one of
s-
the partners obviously has to be married.
Well, yes, for adultery to happen.
Both do.
Well, wait a minute. If
That's
one is
what
not,
I'm
one
trying-
is married and one isn't, then only one is committing adultery, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what
Okay, moving right along.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, so yes.
You're suggesting that they both have to be married for it to be adultery? Am I understanding you correctly?
No, I don't know.
No, I think he said
I-
that, no, for both of them to be
Either way, we don't encourage it.
What?
I said either way, we don't encourage it. Okay, moving right along. So yes, I think that I think when we talk about Musar, this is probably perhaps the most important lesson, and that is and I say it's not easy. So if someone else exposes your negative character, you're automatically going to try to justify it. That's what's going to happen. Through cognitive and conscientious application, you could say, no, they're right. You could admit that, but that's not an easy thing. All the more so, you are not going to have the tendency to apply to yourself that same self-critique. So I think if we take one lesson out of today's discussion, it should be somehow to try to incorporate the lesson of Jethro and the lesson that we learned from the Talmud of a Nazir, wherein we should try to self-analyze, as difficult as that and painful as that is, to try just to open up the can of worms within our own self and our character, and to try to come to terms with and to be exposed to and to be comfortable with the fact that we have shortcomings. Everyone has shortcomings, but as humans, we're obligated to try to address those and perfect them.
There's a wonderful book I read a number of years ago called "Someone Did Something Wrong and It Wasn't Me." It's really a great book, and I can see so many people I know. I try not to make me one of those people, but we justify and try to keep our order of what we think of ourselves by justifying the bad things we're doing or not accepting that we did them.
Yeah, it's
a very easily read book.
it's kind of similar to what we said earlier about someone who lives a life espousing an ideology that comes shattering down to the ground. It's that same, how do you live with yourself now? Like, how do you live with a admission to the previous reality that you lived by being a total farce? Similarly, it's the same thing. The reason why you would try to justify in that instance would be in this case, when you come to the realization, or it's brought to you that perhaps you have character that is less admirable. What that does is it takes your self-perspective or self-evaluation, how you see yourself, and suddenly, we kind of all think we're pretty good guys. Overall, I'm pretty good, 98% good. You have good intentions. And suddenly, whoa, I have a glaring hole in who I am as a human. I don't want to have that. I don't want to live with that, with that knowledge. So that's why we would cover it up. So the first lesson is going to be in all of Musar is to learn how to open up ourselves to self-analysis, self-critique, and thus, only after we do that, only after we apply the lessons, the critique and the lessons, can we be successful in our journey of trying to perfect ourselves. Moving on to patience and anger. I think when we talk about this particular characteristic, I think it's so crucial to realize the importance and the severity and the gravity and the enormity of how vital this character is to us to have successful lives, happy lives, harmonious lives. I believe, and we can try to demonstrate this, that if someone wants to have a happy marriage, it's only possible if they are grounded in patience. In patience, grounded in patience. I think for someone to be a good parent, you can only do that if you have patience. To be a good friend, to be successful in your professional life, to have any sort of interpersonal interactions, it's only possible if you have patience. Also, we'll find that at the root of almost all good character is going to be patience. It's going to be linked to every other positive characteristic. And the opposite of impatience is going to be linked to arrogance. It's going to be linked to be stingy, to get angry, as we'll see, of course, to be narcissistic. Right? Someone who's impatient is narcissistic. It's the same thing. If you're impatient, you're likely to be angry. Right? If you're, if you care only about yourself, you're likely not to care so much about your fellow. Right? All those negative characteristics are really rooted at the same core. It's all I care about is myself. I'm self-centered. I'm selfish. Thus, all I think about is myself. Thus, when someone it does something a little bit, in a way that I'm not perfectly pleased with, I get impatient with them. I perhaps get angry with them. I think of myself, I'm the top of the world. I'm haughty. I'm arrogant. Thus, all the negative character are linked really at the core. And for the positive, or conversely, the positive character is all going to be linked with the opposite. We say that man is presented in the world, and there's a spectrum. You have the body and the soul. Right? The body is very base. The body is just a receptacle, a vessel containing all the negative character. Yet we have a soul. And what's the soul like? The soul's like the Almighty. The soul's linking us to the Almighty. Once we open up our heart to the Almighty, once our soul has a say in the matter, then of course we should be kind. Because that's what that's emulating the Almighty. That's what the Almighty wants from us, and that's what's right. Of course, we cannot get angry. Well, I can only get angry if I feel like there's injustice being done, or I feel like what my needs or what my desires at this moment are not being met. When I realize that the Almighty is involved, how could I possibly get angry? How could you have any arrogance? Arrogance is the opposite of faith. Because if you realize that the Almighty gave you everything you had, well, how can you possibly ascribe or have any pride in your own personal gifts and accomplishments when you realize that the Almighty is holding your hand all the way through? Thus, we say that this spectrum is really at the core of every character. And I think patience is a very good way to start because, one of the great Musar masters said that patience is maybe ground zero of this world and this character that we want to build via our Musar studies.
You talking about Luzzatto?
Well, I'm talking about
the Just?
Well, no, who said that particular sentence? Yeah. But yes, when you talk about great Musar masters, that's where you start with Luzzatto, 1707 to 1746. Only lived 39 years and wrote like 150 books. Well, it's insane.
His text on watchfulness.
Yes,
is a critical point in the whole Musar teaching.
Oh yeah,
but of course. He would say it's the most important, but the fundamental Musar teaching is humility.
That's at the top of the list, right? Yeah, Nava's at the top of the list.
It's the bottom. It's the foundation.
What Dictor's referring to is perhaps the number one book in all of Musar literature. It's called The Path of the Just, which is not the best. Not the best. I know that the book was called Path of the Just. They just recently, the past couple of years, reprinted it, and they called it The Way of the Upright. Because Mesilah is a way or a path. I think that one's it's a trail, perhaps. So Mesilah. And Yashar means straight. That's probably the best way to say it. I think when I publish it, I'm not going to call it not the path of the just, not the way of the upright. I'm going to call it the trail of the straight. I guess straight maybe has other connotations. So
I didn't know that they had done it.
Yeah, they did it just a couple of years ago. A much better translation, in my opinion. Path of the Just.
Path of the Just.
Luzzatto. So what the book is based upon is a statement of the Talmud of the book of Rozara 20b, the statement of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Who is Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair? He is someone that the Talmud tells us all other stories about him, that he was once walking and he had a stream in the road and he decides, I don't want to walk around the stream, and he split the water, That's the kind of character we're talking about. We also have a great story about his donkey. The donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was stolen. The donkey was stolen. Someone stole him, and he took the donkey away, and he tried to feed him, and he refused to eat. Refused to eat non-kosher food. Refused. Like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair. And the Talmud always says, when people would talk about their own humility, they say, listen, I'm not even like a human. I'm like a donkey. But I'm not like the donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. I'm a regular donkey. So he said his teaching in the book of Avodah is this path, this ladder to greatness. And it starts with Torah, And Torah brings to Zehirus. Zehirus means watchfulness. And that brings to Zerizus, which means Zerizus means to be alacrity, carefulness. And that brings to Nikius, cleanliness. And that brings to Precious, and to etc. One brings to the next, and he basically, you read the book, and he starts with the book saying, listen, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. Everything that I'm telling you, you know, but I'm just reminding it to you. And he basically outlines the path of you starting from ground zero and reaching at the top to Tchias HaMesim, to resuscitating the dead. You want to know how to do it? It's like a simple pathway to prophecy. Very simple. All you got to do is follow the steps, one after the next. Probably steps aren't that easy.
Alan Marinas put out a good book called
Climbing Jacob Ladder.
Holiness Every Day, the Way of Holiness.
The Way of
I'm
Holiness.
sorry, I had a stroke about a year ago, and I lose my train of thought from time to time. But Alan Marinas is one of the contemporary teachers of Musar.
The Musar Institute.
Yeah.
That's his organization. So, I think when we talk about patience, it's a very... we look at this world of good and negative character, and we see really how it's different elements of positive and negative character. But I think one of the best places to start is going to be patience. Now, the crown jewel, as we said, of positive character is humility. And we talk about Moses as being the most humble of men. Why do we find out about Moses' humility, not his kindness, not everything else? Because all that's included. If someone really achieves humility, by definition, they have everything else. Because, like we said, it's really the positive and negative character. It's just. These are opposite spectrums. Are you with God, or are you all soul, or all a body? If you're all soul, then that's humility. But you also have kindness and patience and everything. I think the first step in the right direction is going to be patience. Now, at the other end, at the other extreme, is going to be anger and arrogance. They're the co-conspirators at the top of the dark side. Is going to be those two. Talmud says if someone has anger, doesn't believe in God. What do you mean? You see angry pastors.
See God being angry.
Well, okay, but remember, that's a good point. But that's anthropomorphic.
Well,
anytime we ascribe.
We're not God, so it's okay for God to be angry.
No, it's a little more nuanced than that. It's if you accept the Jewish definition of God, it's an impossibility for God to have anger because God does not have parts. God doesn't have emotions or temperaments. Thus, this is the first page of Maimon. It's literally the first page. It says, that the Jewish belief in when it says that God, the hand of God doesn't have a God. Well, I said the hand doesn't have a God. Sorry, let me slow this down. God doesn't have a body. Thus, the eyes of God are watching Israel. The hand of God. God took the Jewish people out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. Right? What does that mean? Obviously, God doesn't have an anthropomorphism. It's a figure of speech. Right. It's an anthropomorphism. Thus, when we say this is the first page of Maimonides, literally. I think it's the second page in some editions. Turn the page, and he says, "Well, what do you do if you accept this definition of God, not comprised of any parts, not linked to time or space?" Well, then the Torah says a lot of things that seems to run in direct opposition to that. Hand of God, finger of God, the Etzbo Elokim, finger of God. Well, so he says what that means. It's like we said, it's a figure of speech to speak to us the way we understand. When it says that God is happy with us, doesn't mean God could be happy or sad. God could be angry or tranquil. Right? God could be good or bad. Yet it says that God says, "I will show wrath upon you." Right? Well, what does that mean, guys? God can't get angry by definition. What it means is that his behavior towards us is going to be one of anger. Thus, if God punishes us, or what we perceive as being punishment, we'll get to that whole discussion.
Does God have a yetzer hara?
No, absolutely not.
A bad inclination.
But there's also the element that they talk about the God of Abraham or the God of Jacob. But they also said that God revealed himself to different generations, which is why we have names for God. Whether it's Eliyahu or whether it's
Elohim or the tetragram, the ineffable name of God, of course.
Multiple names
That's right. But remember, this is a very subtle and nuanced distinction, because it's very easy to say, "Whoa, God has different names and different characteristics," and that's true. But we have to make this very, very clear distinction between essential characteristics versus characteristics in the form of a behavior. So if God treats us humans, I'll get in a second. If God treats us humans compassionately, we could say God's compassionate. And that's how it's presented in the Torah. But on a theological level, God is not compassionate, because by saying God is compassionate, you're saying God has characteristics, which the Jewish definition of God clearly does not provide room for.
Attributes.
Okay.
Yes.
But then when he has attributes, that also means he behaves in a way that if we, as humans who do have attributes, if we were to describe that, we'd say that someone has attributes. Right? If I'm a kind person, I could be unkind, I could be kind. And well, if I behave in a kind way, I'm a kind person. Right? If you see, doing charity, be nice, going to visit the sick, kind person. Right? As a human, that's what works. If you want to talk to humans, you got to explain God's kind, you say God's kind. In reality, what you're saying on a theological level, the very subtle difference, very important to make this distinction, is that God is not kind. God behaves kindly. However, in order to tell that to us mortal humans, the Torah chooses to go the route that we understand, that's saying God's kind.
But doesn't it say that then he is mine?
Well, it says a lot of things.
So,
there's many anthropomorphisms.
An attribute of retribution.
God's attributes are the way God behaves. Essentially, God doesn't have attributes of anger. That's what I'm saying. It's a subtle distinction.
I mean, I've heard some Christians say that they quoted what Janet just said about vengeance is mine, and they say they use that as an argument against today invoking the death penalty, which, God also says you shall take a murderer from my very altar to die. Now, is there a contradiction there? Because he's commanding us to do that, not...
That's what happens when people try to interpret the Torah on their own. They have no idea what they're doing.
So thinking about anger. Anger, yes, it is a negative emotion, but at times I think it can actually end up being positive. If you become angry and you say, "I'm mad about this injustice, now I'm going to take action. I'm going to do something about this." You see what I'm saying? Sometimes it almost stirs something within us. So it is a negative emotion, but yet it can help us. It can help in a war situation. If you're in combat and they're shooting at you, all of a sudden you get mad. It heightens your adrenaline, and I'm not going to let them shoot.
Fight or flight.
Right. Okay, so it stirs, it can, in a way, be positive if it stirs us to an action that is more positive.
Absolutely. So this is going to be, I think, the next step that we're going to talk about. I had this. No, I'm very happy you guys brought it up. And I'll just throw in a nice Talmudic statement that I wasn't planning on sharing. Probably I just didn't think of it. But the Talmud says in Tractate Yoma, I believe it's 41. I don't know if it's A or B, but it's 41 Yoma. I feel very confident in saying that. Kol Talmid Chacham she'enu notem. Anyone knows Hebrew? Or am I just saying Hebrew for myself?
Of course, like the back of our...
Okay, I'll say it anyhow. I can make it up. I can say whatever I want. No one's telling me. Did you said Hebrew?
Talmud section, we will never. No one here will call you.
Well, okay, but I am saying it. It's going to be on my website. Thus, Hebrew speakers can verify that I'm not just saying gibberish. Kol Talmid Chacham she'eno nokem v'noter kenachash eno Talmid Chacham. Every Talmid Chacham, every Torah scholar that does not take revenge like a snake is not a Talmid Chacham. Now, if you were to ask me, Rabbi Wolbe, is revenge a positive characteristic or a negative characteristic? What would we say? It is a negative characteristic. But like you said, there is a time and place for anger. There's a time and place for revenge. So what we're going to have to figure out is, how do we turn on the switch of doing the righteous anger, being angry at injustice, being angry at people doing evil, being angry when it's appropriate to be angry, yet not be angry when it's just our negative character. So I think once we are able to have that balance, to have that composure, to have that ability to evaluate and assess, not just impulsive anger, but once we incorporate this patience into our character, we'll have the baseline on which we can make the deliberation necessary to decide, should I get angry, should I not angry? Thus, knee-jerk anger is almost always bad. But we could do, and I had this plan later. It says there was one of the great Muslim masters had a special shirt that he would put on whenever he had to get angry. So, like, whenever there was a reason for him to get angry, he wouldn't express anger. Oh, and start screaming and cursing and shouting and throwing stuff. He would be very calm, very tranquil. He would go to what's called change his shirt. Okay, now I'm angry. This is the righteous anger. Let it fly, right? There was another one who said, whenever he had to get angry, he would wait an hour beforehand. There's a million cases where you might want to get angry. Maybe you want to show your kid that this is a wrong thing. Your kid, runs into the street, right? Maybe it's not a reason to get angry because it's very dangerous for the kids to run in the street. They could get hurt, and that's not, Or a kid does something that it's important for them to realize that this is wrong. This is not the way we behave. This is not what I expect more of you, This is not the, should a parent feel the need that righteous anger is correct? So there's two ways to do it. There's the knee-jerk reaction, which is probably the natural. It's just the flaring up of the regular anger that is latent within them. Or they could wait and be measured, be patient, and then turn on that switch. Or measured anger.
How do you learn to do that?
Well, we have to be patient first.
Well, when you talk about anger, I used to be very angry. I'd fly off the handle. In fact, when I got married, my mother said to my wife, "Don't talk to Dick until he's had a cup of coffee and breakfast," because I'd fly off the handle. And I started studying Musar back in the 90s. And I found a verse in Proverbs, 15th chapter, verse 1. It says, "A soft answer turns away wrath." And that's an outward and an inward wrath that's there. And I made that a little sign, and I put it on my bathroom mirror. And in the car, when I drive, I would say, "A soft answer turns away wrath," whenever I felt angry at something. And I practiced that for a week. And then the next month, I practiced it for a week.
So this is real Musar.
Yes, that's real
This is
Musar.
it, guys.
Huh?
We have a live living example.
Yeah, and I don't have anger anymore unless I choose to be angry.
That's incredible.
And it
works.
It works.
It's like magic.
It works. Yes, it does.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry?
Can you have the reverse of that?
Well, if someone, there's also the danger. Remember, there's a danger of being when someone is desensitized, if someone is calloused, if someone is so tranquil that they're like dead to whatever happens to them, basically. Like they're good, bad means they're just dulled. That's the negative characteristic that potentially come with too much patience or too much, where you have to take what happens around you. It has to be alive. It's like what we talked about Yisro. Like when things should make an impact upon you, but the response of anger, the knee-jerk anger, is the wrong response. It's the patient's response, but also it bothers you what you see, but you're not reacting to it. So that would be the danger. Anyhow, so Talmud says if someone has anger, they don't believe in God. What do you mean? This is where we got started, right? You see many people that believe in God and they're angry, or they could get angry. The answer is that what happens when someone gets angry? You had a good word. You fly off. What do you say? Fly off the handle. Right? Someone who's angry feels like they lose it. Right? They're not themselves. They're clearly not behaving rationally. There's something missing from their decision-making process. They do things that they would never do if they had to think about it. So I said, hey, listen, you have reason to be angry. What's the correct response, right? If you had all your functions, if you were in complete control of all your faculties, you would give a measured response. Yet when we're angry, we go over the top. We fly off the hinge. We fly off the handle, whatever metaphors we want to use, right? We're not ourselves. This was one of the cool things I discovered. What it says is that when someone is angry, their soul is replaced by their Yetzer Hara. Thus, what they use to measure and to evaluate and to give a proper response to a certain situation, though that faculty is not there. Thus, they fly off the hinge. They act irrationally. Right? They lose it because they actually did lose it. This godly soul that's within them is replaced by something else that, in fact, the Talmud calls a foreign god. This is remarkable. The Yetzer Hara is called a foreign god. Lo yeh b'cha el zar, the Talmud says, the verse says, you should not have within you a foreign god. So the Talmud asks the question, what's a foreign god within you? Right? What's a foreign? This is Shabbos, the book of Shabbos 105b. Dan has a copy of it because Dan has the book of Shabbos on the verse on the pages that cover 105, I believe. 105b. It says, what is this foreign god that's within you? That's the Yetzer Hara. Thus, there's this element of godliness that we have as a soul, and then there's this element of a foreign god that we have as a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination. When someone gets angry, they don't have a God. They don't believe in it. What do you mean I don't believe in God? Ask me, I'll tell you I believe in God. But you're angry. When you're angry, this godly element within you, you lose it. And it's replaced by something else. Thus, you don't believe in God. Thus, you don't behave rationally. You lose, you fly off the hinge, you fly off the handle, you behave in a way that is totally not the way that you yourself, in saner times, would argue is the proper way to respond. To me, that was a big insight. So that's terrible. And in fact, the Talmud also says, once again, underscoring the same idea, that I don't want to get sidetracked with the discussion I see we're about to get sidetracked with when I say this. Kol hakoes kol mine gehenam sholtim bo. You hear the key word that you guys all recognize? Someone who gets angry, all forms of Gehenna dominate him, control him. What does Gehenna mean? Gehenna, yes, okay. That's what Talmud says. What does that mean? Let's not talk about what that means. It means Gehenna means purgatory, whatever, punishment. All kinds of punishment. Why? Well, all kinds. Maybe there's a punishment for every kind of misdeed. So there's a punishment for anger. The answer is because anger is a gateway drug to everything else. Like we said, all negative character at the top of the mountain of negative character. Who's the king of the mountain? Anger, and like he has a sidekick we call arrogance, but they're really linked. They're really the same thing. Thus, when someone climbs to the mountain and embraces anger, well, now they have everything else. They open the door to everything because all misdeeds are represented by anger. Thus, all kinds of Gehenna control them because all kinds of misdeeds are now open.
Yeah, but the person that embodies the anger, can push their buttons really easily. All you got to do is say one thing, and you control them. Well,
because it's not hard. It's not hard to flare up or to bring about to surface.
I told Dick one time I would love to have been married to him because I could have pushed him around easily. He didn't. Well, and anger.
Try it.
He said what he told me was bring it. Anger's like a masked emotion because usually there's something underlying it that the person is hiding. It could be pain. It could be, someone they love was hurt. It could be, and so they're really masking and they're really not confronting the emotion they have.
Perhaps.
So they're living a lie, and they're not seeing. They're seeing things as good.
I like to describe anger as by way of introduction. The word that Maimonides used to describe character is deos. Deos. Dea, yidia. What does that mean? It means knowledge. Mental precepts. Now, wait a minute. Is character mental? No, I don't think anyone will really argue that it is mental. It's hardwired to our physiological being. Or is it mental? I don't know. This is a big debate. Where do my characteristics lie? So in Jewish speak, we say it lies on the nefesh. what the nefesh is something I can't tell you. It's, nefesh or neshama, it's not really the soul, it's the spirit. They're not really spirit, that's the ruach, whatever. But Maimonides calls it...
The neshama.
Well, there's a neshama.
Difference.
That's right.
And the nefesh.
That's right. Thus, and the midos, the characteristics are on the nefesh.
Yeah.
Maimonides calls it deos, which means knowledge. Deo means knowledge. It's in the brain. Why would the Rambam, Maimonides, the Nesher Agadol, as we call him, why would he use the word for knowledge to describe character? So, what was explained was that at the root of many of the characteristics is a cognitive element. Thus, an angry person is someone who in his brain, when they are crafting a response to a situation, imagery of anger is what they find. Thus, it has a certain intellectual is the wrong word, but a cognitive element to it where someone says, "Oh my gosh, this person did X, Y, or Z to me. They cut me off in the car, or they pull out the checkbook by the register, or whatever." And like the way to respond to that, or God forbid, there was the kid on the plane who cried a little bit, right? What's the response? Like, what's the correct response? In their head, there's images of anger as the response necessary. Like, what you're saying is that, well, maybe someone has influences that are contributing to that are not necessarily part and parcel to their character. Yes, that may be the case.
In that case, that person who's consistently angry or responds angry. I'm not speaking about the parent who looks out for child living across the road, because that's a different kind of anger. That's not. But the person who is internally angry, that their response to most things becomes anger, is usually almost like a coping mechanism because they're hiding stuff. And it's usually something they're afraid of, or it could be some sort of mask. That's my experience.
And anger can be passed on.
It can be passed on.
It's a learned behavior.
And the children learn. You don't cry, you get mad. But anyway,
I had a rabbi say to me,
Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi Zucker, 30 years ago, in a conversation with him about anger, he said, "Why would you turn the control of your emotions over to somebody else?"
that's my point.
And that struck me like, yeah, why would I do that? You get angry on the freeway, you get angry at all kinds of things, and you fly off the handle and so forth. And when he made that statement to me, why would you turn the control of your emotions over to somebody else? I stopped. Yeah. A light went on.
Well, was that around the same time you heard a soft voice turns away whatever it was you cited?
Yeah, soft answer turns away wrath.
Right.
That's the first verse of chapter 15 of Proverbs.
Right. Was that around the same time?
Yeah, it was when I was studying Musar, and I was introduced to it. Because I had events in my life that there was an event that happened in my life that things were not going well. It had nothing to do with my marriage, but it was some investments I had made that all went sour. And I said, something's wrong in my life. I've got to change it. And I went to Rabbi Zucker, who was the rabbi of Tiferet Israel up in Dallas at that time, about 35 years ago, and was talking to him, and he introduced me to Musar. And I also went to Chabad, and that's where I found Alan Marinas and so forth. And I began the study of Musar from that time, because I didn't want to control anger. I wanted to get rid of it. And it's a different thing to control something, but I wanted to get rid of it, where if I wanted to get angry, I could choose to get angry. Mm-hmm. And it didn't happen as a result of somebody's control over me. And it works. And that goes for all the other character traits that we have, whether it's the opposite of gratitude is not ingratitude, it's entitlement. And you find all these character traits of gratitude and humility and loving kindness, and you practice these things, and after a while, after a decade, you find that it works.
Okay, so it's 11:30 already now. I really feel like I didn't actually get to talking about patience enough. I am ready to go for another half hour if anyone else wants to go. We're good to go? We're good to go? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about so we have basically...
We have patience.
So we have this problem of anger, and the response to that's going to be humility, but the first step in achieving that is going to be patience. Now, we're told that Moses is the most humble of all men. Rashi explains humble, patient. Additionally, we saw that Moses, as a young person, he went and he suffered with the Jewish people. And the word for suffering in Hebrew, as in bearing a load or a yoke, is the same word as patience. That is a big, big, big insight. Because what the Torah is really telling us is, as we know in the Hebrew language, the words themselves underscore their meaning. The word for Hebrew for patience is the same word as suffering in dealing with bearing a yoke or carrying a burden. Sorry?
I like long
Long suffering is a synonym for patience.
suffering is someone who's patient.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That's cool. And the Torah tells us about Moshe. He was the most humble person. As a youngster, he was had this ability to suffer with others. Additionally, we find where Moses is Vayitzavim in Exodus. Moses and Aaron were instructed on the people. Rashi explains what they mean to be patient with them. And lastly, I found a fourth place where the great leaders of the people are told to be patient, or patience is demanded of them. Moses is about to die, and he asks God to find a suitable replacement, and he says, I want someone who could be patient with the people. So we find two things. We find leadership of the Jewish people linked to patience. Additionally, we find that the word patience has the same meaning as suffering. So, if you were to ask the question, what are the most important, most essential characteristics of great leaders? I remember they had in the 2012 debates, so they asked whoever was left of the Republican field, how would you describe yourself in one word? I remember that? Someone was saying, responsible.
I should remember that.
Right, responsible, or I remember Mitt Romney said, resolute. And then Newt Gingrich says, cheerful. No one remembers that? It was because everyone was giving all these heavy-handed answers, and he's like, oh, cheerful. So when we think of a great leader, we think of someone who's charismatic, a gifted orator, influential. That's what we think of someone as being a great leader.
I think a decision maker.
Decision making, perhaps.
But also,
The Torah tells us that the way we define leadership is their capacity for patience. At its core, patience is the ability, long-suffering, to deal with the things that irritate you in life and to accept that pain wordlessly and quietly.
but patient. But it also says anything of an extreme. It doesn't say could extreme.
We don't accept evil, of course.
Right.
We said there's dangers of extreme patience where that could result in...
patience that
Oh,
goes
no,
to
yes.
appeasement is not acceptable.
Yes. Remember, we're talking about patience as a way to have measured responses. When someone's impatient, they lose their decision-making ability because what happens after something ignites the anger or the impatience, the response that is, like you said, not controlled by themselves, the emotional response that results is generally either it's not a proportion, it's not measured. Thus, when someone has patience, they have the ability to make a decision to weigh their options. Thus, if anger is a response, right? We don't believe in appeasement, right? We don't believe in accepting evil, not embracing, but even accepting that. We believe in finding that. That's what we talk about the Talmud Chacham, the Torah scholar, who has to be able to take vengeance like a viper. Right? Because that's sometimes the correct response.
So sometimes, where do you find that so-called happy medium?
Well, it's not a medium. That's the point. It's two separate things. The patience enables someone to make the decision, whatever the decision may be. That may be as extreme as being as the take the vengeance of a viper. Thus, it's not a medium. It's separate elements.
So
Patience enables someone to have all the faculties to make a decision, whatever the decision may
It's a
be.
decision, like he said. You're not giving up control of the decision making to your yes or all your emotions. It's all
Patience. What's I say? Patience is taking the reins of the decision
to
making.
exercise watchfulness.
Yeah,
okay, but what do you?
you're throwing in
what
too
would
many
you say-
keywords.
Since we're talking about leaders and everything, there was Churchill, who I consider a great leader, and there was Neville Chamberlain, his predecessor. Now,
Terrible.
you could make an argument that Neville Chamberlain was exercising a lot of patience with Hitler.
And is that the right response?
I think it turned out to be very much the wrong response.
And
But-
I don't believe that anyone would challenge that.
Well, but we have the benefit of hindsight, because if Hitler would have
But
gone away,
what was
Neville Chamberlain might have been the hero today.
but what was Churchill's attitude up till when he was appointed prime minister? What was his response to this 1937, 1938, 1939? What was he preaching?
I think
As loudly
was
as he
a little
can.
I think he was a little more but let's say he recognized it. He may have been somewhat naive himself, but he recognized. He eventually preached.
No, he was preaching. I read the book. I read the Second World War.
Well, no, but
all 21
he
volumes.
once spoke very highly of Hitler. Churchill once spoke very highly of
What was
Hitler's
that?
speaking ability
Oh,
and leadership ability because of what he did pulling Germany out of the depression.
yes.
So at the same time, I think he was very perceptive of
The danger, yes. And I read the book. Remember, he wrote the book himself. Thus, he has his spin. He has the say on the history, but it's one of the most definitive.
The one that he wrote.
The
himself. I
Second
haven't
World
read
War,
his
exactly.
whole
The
thing.
Second World War. Remember, Churchill won a Nobel Prize for literature. He was a painter. He was an architect. He was an artist, and obviously, he was a great, probably the most. I'm saying in history, a military leader. We have anyone like that? Napoleon. I don't know. Alexander. Remarkable. Huge fan. All in. Someone told me recently that he was dyslexic. Is that right? I don't know. To me, that's surprising.
There's even some rumors he might have been gay or bisexual. No, I have.
Maybe. Who knows?
He didn't do well in college.
He didn't do well in college.
He went to Stanford college. He wasn't a good student. So maybe there was
But
something
I'm saying clearly he was an intelligence, a genius beyond description. Like he invented just the range of accomplishments that one guy had. He invented the system for large deployment of troops from marine vessels, thus ships. So the landing in Normandy, whatever, I don't remember the details of. He invented that. Like he came up with prototypes and invented. Like he was a crazy maniac. He's the probably a more fleshed out version of Roosevelt, of Teddy Roosevelt. Just a maniac. He would work till 5 a.m, just insane, and just had energy, boundless energy, and was dealing with a million things.
But he was.
It makes sense, but somehow that didn't hinder him
Think of
from.
the whole, not
Yeah.
do things small.
But
Either way, so
speaking, it's not just. I didn't know all of the military stuff you just described, but I mean his rhetoric was so inspirational.
insane. Yeah.
But he was voted out during the war.
I think it
45,
was
45.
Yeah, it was when it was
45.
winding down. Yeah, which shows the fickleness of the constituency.
Yeah, but he galvanized the people, the English people, to fight and to win, and to win at all costs. Because otherwise,
He used to go out when the city was being bombed and put all the areas.
He didn't hear anything. It's great. So a little bit like Roosevelt. Your personal politics is irrespective of someone's personal politics. We could agree that Roosevelt, and Churchill shared some of the
I
same
think Roosevelt
machismo.
I wish Obama would spend time reading Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech. He should do it several times.
Well, I'm not talking about
He might-
I'm not talking about Franklin Delano. I'm talking about
Oh, well, Teddy was...
Teddy.
Yeah, okay, well, but
Roosevelt,
FDR was great.
Roosevelt was a sick old man.
Which one?
At
You're talking about
Malta.
Franklin?
Yeah.
Well, later on, but
Oh,
not
yeah.
early, not in the beginning. He was
No,
there a long
not in
time.
38 and 39, but got to 44. He was.
Sure. Well, we all get we all get older.
Politics.
Say what?
No.
We all get older.
Come on.
okay. So like this.
I'm 86 years old. I was there.
For every interpersonal relationship to exist and to thrive, I'll repeat that again over the din and cacophony of the voice. For every interpersonal relationship to exist and to thrive, every single one, demands patience. And now the closer, the more intimate the relationship, obviously, the more the need for patience arises. Case in point, there is an inevitability that when someone lives their life in very close proximity to someone else, as in the case of two spouses, they are going to discover characteristic about the other person that is decidedly negative.
Like sometimes they Is that what you're going for?
No. Humans are composed by design, by the Almighty, as having negative character. The vast majority, overwhelming majority of humans don't really do anything to change that throughout the course of their lives. Besides for maybe, do the minor cosmetic cover-ups to have social acceptability. But the vast majority of us have negative character we haven't really addressed. If you're going to be in close proximity and live your life with someone else, you're going to discover character that you probably didn't know that existed before then, and that's going to be very negative in your eyes. For example, you find that your spouse is lazy. You find that your spouse is disorganized, always late, irrational, emotional, uncaring, right? Any one of these characteristics is something that you will almost invariably discover about your spouse. What are you going to do? How are you going to live with this person when you realize that they have this negative character? You have a few options. You could demand they change, but remember, most people will never change. And that friction that's going to emerge with you demanding they change, them not changing, is going to be a source of a contention, but also frustration. And if you are probably going to be honest with yourself, you realize that you probably haven't changed that much yourself. Thus, demanding so much of your spouse is unfair. And you, if you were to be fair with yourself, you realize that you also have negative character. So are you guys just going to live separate lives in separate rooms, separate bank accounts, and just separate lives? Or are you going to get divorced, God forbid? Or are you going to have patience? And going to live and suffer and tolerate the misdeeds, or not the misdeeds, or the negative character of your spouse? Those are your options. Really, essentially, those are your options. Either have separate lives legally with divorce, separate lives practically in every way, aside for a name, just all stay married for the kids. Suffer with frustration and contention, or suffer wordlessly with patience. Those are your options.
No,
Is that
you're
the only-
missing one big option.
What's
and
that?
is you didn't even speak to the other partner about their limiting behavior.
Yeah,
You could-
communication.
I mean, where's
Isn't
the
that an
communication
option too?
I do believe that. I do believe it is. That is. I still think that there's a likelihood that there's going to be something that's going to persist, and you bring it up. I see this with every
Like you talk
all the
about it
time.
and they don't change.
You know, you say you really shouldn't be eating that. You know, and
Then I would suggest a different communication style.
oh, I would agree with that as well.
Because ultimately,
But-
you will lead to divorce.
Okay, but I'm saying it's going to bother you. So maybe you'll either communicate it or you won't communicate
There's
it.
always going to be something about yourself that gets on your nerves.
I mean,
Like
some,
in any relationship, there's always going to be
about that. You can't constantly be like, everything you do is bothering me. At some point, you have to like let something
Yeah.
go.
I mean,
And,
don't we have-
what makes that work? What is going to cause the marriage to succeed and continue and thrive,
Mutual-
despite
the mutual love? I
the
would
mutual
think,
love, but
and
or the mutual
recognizing
patience?
that we're human and none of us are perfect.
Okay, there you go. That's patience, and living with that. And, I'm sorry.
You have wells of patience you didn't realize you had.
And the three loves mentioned, the way you get past that is by just looking at their positive qualities.
I think that's also a way to sidestep
Looking away
that.
at the negative.
And could it also be what Dick you know, granted, most of us probably don't make fundamental changes, but would you say the example you just gave about how your anger turned around, was that a fundamental change?
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah. I recognized in myself that I had a lot of negative traits that coming forth, notwithstanding my wife's as well. And we've been married for 59 years. We're going on 60 now.
congratulations.
And she's a Christian. My wife is.
She turned the other cheek.
Well, yeah. It's an interesting, we've had a very interesting marriage and 4 kids. But anyway, it was a change in me, and I've seen changes in her. I've seen more religious changes in her thinking than I have in practicalities, and I've learned to live with her impracticalities.
I mean, you know, Barbara and I have been married. We're going to be 23 years next month. I mean, and God knows we've had, but you know, I know I've got flaws, and she's got a few too, and you know, but I think
Most of it-
communication has been one of
Yeah.
our greatest values.
Most of us know what's wrong with each one of us.
Yeah.
Most of us do. And if we really want to look at the inner person rather than the external person that we portray to everybody else, but internally, who we are, I know where I go wrong. And it's just a matter of trying to work to correct it through the years, and I'm not through yet.
So
I agree with you. I think the desire to stay married is the desire to be happy and to find joy. I totally disagree with you. I think we do have more than capacity to change. I think we do.
I didn't say,
change.
whoa, slow down, Janet.
You said most of
Let's
us
drop the
don't
gloves here.
change.
I said most of us don't. I think we do have the, of course, we have the
They
capacity.
make a choice. They all have the
I agree that we have the capacity to change. Of course, I never said that. That's we want to have this discussion. We don't have the capacity to change.
I think we all.
You said we
think-
have the capacity, but we don't generally
I
do
don't.
it.
I think that there, within most of us, there are characteristics that haven't changed since we were teens at their core. Yes, we might have covered up a little bit, but we still have negative character that flares up every once in a while. I stand by that statement.
Well, I think there's what you were saying. I think is very important because I think in a divorce, and I don't want to offend anyone who might have been divorced, you know, but can it be argued that there is a certain selfishness if someone decides to just throw up their hands and give up? Because I think the people that suffer the most in a divorce are the kids,
Of course.
and the parents are. You know, they're thinking more of themselves in too many cases,
That's pretty obvious.
and not the devastation that happens to.
But
you know,
but what's the cause of most divorces?
The cause is usually unforgiveness and unresolved resentments are the basic cause of divorce.
what's the root of that?
Impatient
What-
expectation.
I would agree.
maybe impact. Are you trying to say?
I'm trying to
impatient?
say that the first step, I remember I preface this by saying, of course, there's more advanced level, but the first step of living with someone else is the ability to tolerate their quirkiness. Thus, and I call that patience, tolerating their quirkiness. I'm saying it means to bear, to suffer a little bit. Obviously, it doesn't mean to suffer is a heavy word,
I don't like
but it means
the
to.
word
I know I don't like it either.
tolerate.
Carry the weight, so that they tolerate. Tolerate's a better word. Tolerate. Do we agree? Tolerate's a better
He
word.
said he didn't
I don't,
like.
I
Which
don't
word do you
like
like?
tolerate.
So which word do we like?
Do you like to be tolerated?
No.
We need to talk to you.
No, but it's a part of. Well, I mean, well, so much. I think it's maybe easier to see it when you think about parenting children. Like, there's all kind of stuff I tolerate from my children, and it doesn't mean I love them any less. It's just I see them for the undeveloped, irrational people that they are, and I choose to love them in spite of that and have patience with that. to a certain extent. You know, am I making sense?
Yes.
Well,
I think
tolerate's not necessarily a bad word. Like there's a certain element. I think because with children,
not to make a fuss. We say that's a better way to say it. Not to make a fuss over every little thing.
Don't
Every
make
time the toothpaste cap is not done, or every time the shower's not left the way you like it, or every time the garbage is not taken out, or every time you leave your supper on your plate on the table, every time you don't make your bed, every time you roll your sock into a ball and throw it into the what's called, and don't pull it out like that and make it easier to. Right? All these little things that happen in life. Right? Don't make a fuss over it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Of course, these aren't the deep-rooted things. But if these things are something you just can't live with, it being completely perfect means if you can't live unless it's completely perfect, you're impatient. Right? You can't tolerate whatever you want to tolerate, not make a fuss, whatever word we're going to use to be happy and to get past the little things in life that irritate you, that rankle you. To get past that is patience. Yeah. Of course, it's not the most deep-seated issue. Of course not. It's the first step. The first step to the higher level that we call humility is going to be this simple thing of patience, learning to deal with life when it's not exactly the way that you envision it to be or the way it ought to be. So like we said, I think, like Dick demonstrated, that the best way to do that is to try to train yourself in situations or to incorporate within yourself that, you know what, it's perhaps, the best way to respond is patiently and to practice that. I perhaps want to propose that maybe, for me, the thing I'm most impatient about is which line at the checkout counter is the shortest. And I can make calculations based upon how many people, which I think is short-sighted. It's not about how many people; it's about how many stuff you have in line. Exactly. Yeah. You got to look.
It usually doesn't work when you go to the next line.
It never works. I know. And it's like, but sometimes you see 5 people, but really you could tell from their body language which 2 people are together. Thus, it's only really one cart, and which people are more likely to put up the checkbook, which people are most likely to fiddle with their coins and not just swipe their card. Like, to me, this is a big deal. I think it's not a big deal. I never erupt in anger over it, but internally, it's something which I'm monitoring constantly, and I think maybe for me it would be a good lesson in patience. No, but that's a way to avoid the issue. But to take the issue head on is I'm going to the store and I'm going to go to the line that I assume is going to be the longest. And to sit there and to accept it and to tolerate it or to not make a fuss about it and not have it well within you that this is a big deal. Right? And that is a small step in practicing patience. I think that's maybe a good argument. Or maybe a good exercise to do would be to, I don't know, maybe go out for lunch or go out for coffee with someone that you disagree with politically and talk only politics. And to accept that someone has another, and that's fine. And what do you say about that? Never.
I enjoy, to tell you the truth, I enjoy talking with people more that disagree than those that I agree with.
Yeah, but they don't like talking.
No, but seriously, I like to think I can be disagree without being disagreeable. I would hope most of us could.
Yeah, but I think it's sometimes when you see someone, like when you see someone on the other side of the aisle who espouses a position that bothers you, you read an article that's that's saying something which is embracing a position that it bothers you, right? If you want to write an angry response, but you're like, why should I waste 5 minutes to make a comment? Is perhaps the lesson in patience is going to be to read the article and to not have that response.
Yeah, next time you're in a conversation with somebody that is a Democrat, instead of saying, well, we're going to agree to disagree, why don't you ask him, how did you come to that conclusion? And it's just...
Okay. Is that going to settle the issue?
No, but you're gonna get an insight into that,
and you'll emerge a more patient person.
About
hopefully.
It-
Back to the whole spouse thing. To just add a few little wrinkles to it. The Hebrew word, back to the Hebrew word for getting married is not in English is to get married. In Hebrew, it's noseh isha. The word noseh, which means to lift or to carry a woman. That's what it means. Nisuin means, and there are those that want to invoke this as saying that yes, marriage is accepting upon yourself to live with someone who's going to have quirks about them and maybe attitudes or characteristics that are not exactly going to make it super duper smooth, and you're going to live with that. And the verse in Proverbs, back to Proverbs, says, "Tov lagever ki yisa ol minu urav." I think it's chapter 9. It's good for a man to accept a burden, a yoke, as a youngster. And the Midrash tells us what yoke we're referring to. It says the ol isha, the yoke of marriage. It says it describes marriage as a yoke, right? Because it is carrying with you the burden. Obviously, we're talking on a very simplistic level, but the burden of living with someone who has a different response to a million different issues. And it's acclimating to a life with someone who is different. Every human is different, and the most intimate of relationships is going to be marriage. You live with someone your entire life. You spend you spend the majority of your waking hours, or maybe not majority of your sleeping hours, but your life you're spending with someone, and that invariably is there's going to be differences. You're different people. You have different perspectives on a million different things in life.
Would you say it's impossible for someone to personally refine themselves without ever being married?
With what?
I would not say that, but I do
Without
believe.
being married. So I think being married is where you're able to see each other's flaws.
I look at marriage as the arena where self-profession is most demanded of us. Because how are you going to make this work? You're going to compromise. You're going to have to let yourself compromise.
You can avoid all your issues, but when you're married, you're reflecting back and forth to each other.
When you're single, you can be as selfish as you want.
It's easier to be single, I guess, in that sense than married. Now, later in life, you may regret it, but you're avoiding a lot. I think if you avoid marriage, I think
you've got to accept the fact that most people will not change, and there'll be fundamental characteristics of the person that you're married to that will never change. Like I can move in a pickup truck. My wife takes an 18-wheeler. To move, and she's a collector, and she's got stuff that dates back 30 and 40 years in files. Like what good? Well, it's good information, and I can never do anything with that. And it used to drive me up the wall, but it doesn't anymore.
Then you read the Proverbs.
I just read an 18-wheeler when we moved.
Just deal with it. But
No, I said you read Proverbs.
Oh yeah,
You read Proverbs, and that helped.
yeah.
It's interesting, even in New Testament theology, I think it's Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, where he says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together." So it's interesting that the word yoke is, what's the Hebrew word for yoke?
Ol.
Ol?
Ol. Ayin vav lamed ol. Just to conclude, OLE. I don't know. Ol.
Ayin Lamed and Dalet.
Sorry, Ayin
Dalet.
vav lamed.
Lamed. Okay.
Not O. That'll be Ode. I want to conclude with a few insights here. We find a statement in the Talmud and Shabbos as follows. It says, the rabbis taught, "Hane'elavim ve'enam olvim," people that are denigrated but don't respond. Someone castigates you and you don't respond. Someone who hears their shame and doesn't react. Someone who acts out of love and is happy with their yisurim, with their suffering. Someone who accepts their suffering with joy. On them, the verse declares, "The oavav consists of Shemesh." And the lovers of God are like the sun that the sun that leaves in its full capacity. Now, if you guys remember, we talk about the sun and the significance of the sun and how the sun, Moses' face was like the sun, and the sun is representative of the soul, and the three things that are a measure of the world to come, or the sun. But when we talk about the sun, it means spiritual. It's a reference to spirituality at its fullest extent. And what it's telling us over here is that the full manifestation of human greatness could already be experienced in someone who's just able to tolerate or to live with a life that is not exactly ideal. I think that, yes, have you reached the promised land when you're patient? No. But Moses, we talk about Moses, what do we call him out for? How do we signal out his greatness? The beginning of his journey and the end of his journey. Beginning of the journey is patience. The end of the journey is humility. That's what we talk about. Another great story here. This is a fantastic story. Rabbi Moses Feinstein, we mentioned him last week. We talked about abortion as in being the preeminent source for modern response literature on the multitude of halachic areas. Think of him as the most significant rabbi that we've had in America, for sure in America, probably ever. We can safely make that argument. So, in his house, there was once a phone call. They used to say in America that all you need to be a rabbi was a telephone. Because all you got to do is call Rabbi Feinstein. That's all you needed, really, was a telephone. So there was this one time we had a phone call in his house, and one of his students picked up the phone because he was there, and the rabbi was busy. And the woman on the phone answers the phone and says, "What time is candlelighting?" Every time there's a candlelighting, every week of the year, candlelighting time changes. What time is candlelighting? I'm sorry. First, he says, "Can I speak to Rabbi Feinstein?" Rabbi Feinstein's not available. Well, what can I do for you? What time is candlelighting? He says, "Why don't you just get any one of 1,000 Jewish calendars? It's candlelighting time." The woman tells him, "I've been calling Rabbi Feinstein for 25 years, every single Friday, to find out." It's not my car. Okay. To find out what time is candlelighting. And he never mentioned anything about calendars. So think about that. It's like the most precious time of any individual in the Jewish nation. Literally, this time is very, very valuable. This woman calls him up and says, "What time is candlelighting?" The great leader that he was, he would go to the calendar and tell her what time it is. And she'd call back next week. And the week after, for 25 years, the same woman's been calling, "What time is candlelighting?" And he had the patience to deal with this irritant that is this woman who just could do something so simply. Don't tell her to your calendar. No. Deal with the people in life that like that, and that's patience. I think, and that's a mark of one of the of a great leader. Someone who's able to deal with the smallest of people, so to speak. Don't register on the not someone who comes with an entourage, right? Simple people, and to deal with them patiently and answer the questions, and not tell them, "Oh, why don't you figure that out on your own?" And I think that if we adopt this attitude, we do some sort of patient building exercises. We're well on our way to have more productive, more healthy interpersonal lives, of course, with the relationships in our lives that matter the most, our family, our spouses, our children, but also our professional lives will be, I think, markedly improved when we begin this journey of becoming a more perfect person with taking the first step in becoming a more patient person. And that's that, guys. Thank you all for listening. And thank you for the suggestion. And next week, we will not be convening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
What are we going to talk about in 2 weeks?
I don't remember what's the schedule.
I will send out an email. It's always at the website under Learn